I'd like to thank the organizers of this event. I'm always flattered and honored to participate. It's a great opportunity and a venue that is different than most venues that I participate in debate discussions on the Congo with people from all walks of life. I see people here from the United Nations, but also people here who also Congolese, people from the region, and so it's a great venue. Today I'm just the moderator, and we have three very distinguished panelists here today, coming from very different points of view, and I think they complement themselves wonderfully. We have Michael Deibert, who is an author and journalist, who's written extensively both on the DRC as well as other countries, including Haiti and Mexico. His book on the Congo is an excellent overview and analysis of the Congolese conflict. I encourage you to read it. He's also, I'm going to read parts of their bios, but you can read it also online. He's written extensively in various journals of note and newspapers, including the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Miami Herald, and been featured on international television channels. He was awarded a grant from the International Peace Research Association and was selected as a finalist for the Kurt Schork Award in International Journalism. And as I said, his book on the Congo is called The Democratic Republic of Congo Between Hope and Despair, and I recommend you read that. Secondly, we have Kambale Musavuli, who I see every time I'm here at Congo Week because he's one of the organizers of the event here. I'm very happy that he today is on the panel and not in the audience. He is one of the most, if not the most dedicated activists, Congolese activists in the United States, carrying out activism in the name of Congolese. He studied civil engineering at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University in Greensboro, and has organized campaigns for social change, and is currently touring the United States, Canada, and Africa. He just told me that he will be moving to Ferguson, just to show you sort of his ambition to bridge various different issues from Ferguson to Kinshasa of international solidarity. He's also written widely in many distinguished publications, Washington Post, New York Times, and Huffington Post, and has received a Congolese Hero Award. Lastly, Alain Seckler works at the United Nations, a former colleague of mine, and has been with the UN since 1990, much longer than I think I was probably in secondary school, or no, not quite. I was in high school in 1990. So many years in the UN, has worked in the Congo between 2005 and 2009, and is now currently working with the Department of Peacekeeping Operations here in New York on MONUSCO, the peacekeeping mission. He is here today in his private capacity, but that is the work that he has been doing. So please join me in welcoming the panelists. Can everybody hear us? Do you guys want to do microphones? Do you care?
Are there people downstairs?
No, there's no one downstairs.
So we can just talk like this. I think it might be easy. Everybody can hear me, right? If you can't, we can go back to the microphone. But I think it'd just be more informal and also less burdensome passing the microphone back and forth. What we're going to do is I'm going to give 5 minutes of introductory comments just to sort of set the stage. I know some people here know an enormous amount about the DRC, others not. So I'm just going to set the broad stage. And then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to also give 5 minutes of their impressions about the current situation, the challenges, and perhaps the priorities of action. And then we're going to have a debate amongst the panelists. We're probably going to reserve at least 30 or 40 minutes at the end for Q&A. I think we're scheduled for 2 hours total, is that correct? Right, so we'll have lots of time for Q&A at the end. So all I ask is that when you do ask questions at the end, that you identify yourself and that you keep the questions or comments short, brief, and cordial. And with that, let me say a couple of words about the current situation in the Congo. As I think we all know, the Congolese conflict that I consider still ongoing is an extremely costly one. The only real measure we have of how costly in human terms it is a mortality study that was carried out and concluded that between 1998 and 2006, over 5 million people died. Now that's only a short part of the war because the war officially began in 1996, but the violence began in 1993, and most people, at least I would consider that the conflict persists until today, although in a very different form than in 1996. So in terms of human cost, even though the vast majority, over 90% of those deaths, are people who died as a humanitarian consequence of the fighting, it's impossible not to recognize that the human cost is unacceptably high and shockingly high. Where are we today in terms of the conflict? Well, the broad overview is that in 2002 there was a peace deal that was signed between all the major belligerents that led to the reunification of the country. The first elections since the 1960s, first national elections since the 1960s, first multi-party national elections since the 1960s were held in 2006. That was supposed to be the culmination of the peace process. Those elections were won by the current president, Joseph Kabila. Unfortunately, the violence escalated after that instead of coming to an end. You actually had a higher number of IDPs in the Congo, as high a number of IDPs in the Congo last year as you did almost at the peak of the conflict in 2000. There were a succession of rebellions in the eastern Congo led by armed groups, or centered around armed groups backed by neighboring countries, in particular the Rwandan government, but also many other armed groups that were either rooted in local causes and local dynamics or linked to politicians at the national and the provincial level. The situation is still dire. There are 2.6 million people still displaced today in the Congo. And though there is some good news, so there has been the defeat, for example, of the M23 rebellion last year, has brought us to a point where the Rwandan government, for the first time since 1996, you could say, no longer is itself in the Congo or has a proxy in the Congo, an ally in the Congo. That is certainly some good news, and there is also a new national DDR plan that is supposed to begin sometime. But I think there's also a creeping realization, and this brings us back to, I think, the priority of our discussion today, that institutional reform has not really gotten anywhere in the DRC, or at least has been very halting. And the government that has been put in place by this peace deal is not a transparent, accountable government. And that a lot of the violence, while much of the violence was linked to outside intervention from countries to the east, Rwanda and Uganda in particular, that the dynamics of violence, patronage, corruption at the heart of the Congo in Kinshasa has also fed the conflict, and very little has been done to bring an end to that. There are nonetheless some positive signs in Kinshasa. We now have representative institutions for the first time again since the 1960s. You have a parliament that is, as many things Congolese, riven with discord and often appears very dysfunctional and chaotic, but still is a parliament that debates and provides some sort of check on power. You have a very active Congolese civil society that is extremely active and unfettered, you could say. Media as well. And you have political opposition in parliament that constitutes about a third of the legislature. So nonetheless, there's been relatively little institutional reform, and I think this brings us to the first point of our discussion today, which is the upcoming electoral process. So broadly speaking, you've had a peace process that's created a quasi-democratic government at the national and provincial level. However, violence has continued in the east, and the government in Kinshasa seems to be either not willing or not capable to bring an end to these cycles of violence. And the electoral process is taking part within that context and could either push us further down the direction of a more accountable, transparent, democratic government, or there are, I think, disturbing signs that it could go in the opposite direction, and therefore a lot of the work that's been done in terms of peace building in the Congo could be unraveled. And so just to briefly talk about some of the main controversies with regards to elections. First of all, they're taking place in the context of the past elections in 2011 that almost everybody considered to be at least deeply flawed, if not rigged. I think most independent analysts conclude that we do not really know the results of the 2011 elections. Kabila claimed himself to be winner, but there were widespread irregularities. After that, there were reforms carried out. A new election commissioner was appointed, but the Reverend Abe Manumalu, but he is embattled and considered by the opposition not to be legitimately elected. There is a deeply flawed electoral roll, so the roll upon which people are accredited to take elections. The electoral roll, the voters are allowed to take elections based on this roll. It's deeply flawed, with many ghost voters in the roll. There's a deep controversy over the electoral calendar, where Kabila is insisting that local elections that will be the most complicated elections ever organized in the Congo, that have not been organized in Congolese history, take place first at the end of next year. The opposition claims that this would postpone the much more important national presidential and legislative elections that are supposed to take place by 2016. And so there's a controversy over the sequence of elections. And finally, probably the most controversial aspect that's on the lips of everybody in Kinshasa is the potential revision of the Congolese constitution. And now, this Congolese constitution only allows presidents to have 2 terms. Kabila will have finished his second elected term in 2016, and by the current constitution will not be allowed to stand again. He himself has not pronounced himself on this subject officially, but there are many indications that he wants to change this election, the constitution rather, to stand for a 3rd term. This again is a subject of controversy. So, forgive me for having bombarded you with a lot of different facts, but that sort of sets the stage. I wanted to get that out there so we wouldn't have to, each one of us, go into these details. And feel free, of course, to disagree with me if you think my analysis was flawed. But that sort of sets the stage. Now, having said that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give 5 minutes of just where they see things from their perspective, and then we'll open the debate amongst the panelists. So maybe, Alain, you could perhaps start, if you don't mind, with your own opinion, your own perspective.
Thank you. Working on the DRC from New York, and as a previous member of the UN mission in DRC, one has to realize the complexity of our mandate and the difficult position in which MONUSCO is situated. We have a very broad Security Council mandate, which includes encouraging credible elections, providing logistical support, but also we have also many other tasks. The most important being protection of civilians. We have stabilization. And we have to encourage the government by virtue of a regional agreement, which was signed in 2013, encourage them to undertake necessary key reforms, in particular on security sector reform, decentralization, economic reform, etc. So you have to look at this in a very broad manner. Elections are fundamental. They are a cornerstone of our own strategy at some point in time to leave the DRC. But we need to leave the DRC in a situation where there would not be a reversal into violent conflict. So we need to leave behind institutions which are secure, which are credible. We need to have left behind institutions which are also able to undertake actions against remaining armed groups, and in a situation where these armed groups are basically, hopefully, neutralized. These are our objectives. And now you will see that we are facing a government which, as in the past, in 2010, has again adopted what I would call a souverainist approach, very sovereign approach, saying we are a sovereign country, you are here because we could at any time, which is not correct because we are under chapters, we are under Security Council mandate, but they can be very difficult if they perceive us as being too much involved in encouraging, say, discussions with opposition and etc. Although that is part of our role and part of our mandate, and we will continue to do that. But a few days ago, a very respected human rights official of the Joint Human Rights Office, Mr. Scott Kambale, was expelled, was declared persona non grata by the DRC government because his office published a report and that of human rights violations, very serious human rights violations by the Congolese security sector, police, particularly in Kinshasa. Over 40 young, let's say, criminals or said so, were killed or disappeared forcibly. And after that, Mr. Kambale was expelled. Although human rights monitoring is part of the mandate bestowed upon us by the Security Council. The Secretary General and the head of MONUSCO have written, have protested, have asked that this person be allowed to return, and also that threats which are currently happening against personnel of the Human Rights Office, which is belongs both to MONUSCO and to the Human Rights Office, High Commission for Human Rights, that the threats again stop. That is number one. Number two, a few weeks ago, publicly, the DRC authorities asked that MONUSCO start its withdrawal, its drawdown, several thousand troops or whatever. And also when Mr. Kobler, who is the head of our MONUSCO mission, started to get more involved in organizing electoral roundtables, bringing together the presidential majority, the electoral commission, and the opposition parties, was asked in no uncertain terms to discontinue. So we had to find other ways to continue to pursue his good office's mandate, which is also part of the Security Council mandate. So we are, if I may say so, the UN is in a very difficult situation because on the one hand, we have a mandate to undertake. We have credibility to maintain. And my personal opinion on the Constitution of 2006 is that it should not be changed. And I can perhaps give later on some more details if you wish. For many reasons. Historic, legal, and also on grounds of stability, of long-term stability. But we need at the same time to have and to continue to have working relations with the government to undertake all the other parts of the mandate I mentioned before. So we are approaching the electoral period, which would start with local elections as per the calendar of the Electoral Commission next year, late next year, and pursue with provincial elections and afterwards national legislative and presidential elections. We can talk more about that. Internationally, I also would like to draw your attention, we should also look at elections in the region. Presidential elections are coming up in Burundi in 2015. We have elections looming in presidential election 2017 in Rwanda, in Uganda in 2016. And now, if you look at the constitutions, the DRC constitution, I think Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania have term limits. Uganda does not have. You saw a few days ago Burkina Faso, where there was a request to change the constitution. And I think in Rwanda, where we have somebody who has been president officially since 2003, there are also now calls again to change the constitution ahead of the presidential election in 2017. So the president of DRC may be looking at other situations, and this further complicates the whole issue. Also, the international community is not necessarily on the same page. Perhaps African countries, some of them, not all, may be tempted to say, well, constitutional changes are possible and they're right. It's a sovereign prerogative of a country to change its constitution. The question is when and how, and if or not it comes in circumstances which may enhance or not stability. And I think that is the question at the root which we are facing in the electoral process. If there were to be a change in the constitution, would that lead to increased instability or not? That would be some of this. I think
we'll definitely get into the issue about the constitution. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges facing the country today. Thank you very much, Alain. Kambale, if I could ask you to give your perspective.
No matter what the preparation is to speak about what's happening in the Congo, Every time I get in these panels, I get emotional. And the reason why I get emotional, twofold. One, those who represent the Congo do not have the voice. And I'm speaking specifically about the Congolese women. Because the Congolese woman in the Congo right now, she's wondering if it's in the East, specifically even for my people, Amnande, is why over 80 people were massacred. And then in 2 weeks, they did not hear from the president of the country. Martin Kobler with MONUSCO, who's leading MONUSCO in Congo, was the one providing some form of care and support to the people there. So that's the challenge that they face. And I'm seeing the same similarity with what took place in 2006 after the election, that right after the election, violence erupted in the East and people were so distraught. Well, where is the presence of the Congolese state in those issues of security? The other one is what one of the Congolese elders said once, that the Congolese have to look for two things, right? One, external intervention, and what also they're doing on the ground. And he shared about how in the 1990s, they mobilized to remove Mobutu democratically. What they did not foresee was that in the democratic process of removing Mobutu from power, Western nations, specifically the United States and United Kingdom, used a military solution to remove Mobutu, where they supported Rwanda and Uganda in their invasions, which has now unfolded this Holocaust proportion war, right? So they're very conscious that no matter what we do on the outside, we have to look at it from the two prisms of external intervention and also local reality. In the external intervention, I'm really looking at the so-called moral authority the United States has. You know, I usually look at U.S. position in Latin America, where when leaders in Latin America that don't fall into U.S. Strategic interest, the U.S. is very great at saying there are no free and fair elections in these countries. But then when we look at the situation in the Congo, some may argue that necessarily the U.S. does not have so much power, right, in the process in the Congo. But I would point out when the U.S. withheld $100,000 to, actually, well, I think it was $200,000 to a Rwandan military academy that were supposed to take place in 2012, we saw some shift in the political dynamics in the Congo, right? So no, the influence that the U.S. has on Congo's politics is very important, even the little influence that he has. Now, in terms of also the Congolese, right? Now I'm speaking about the internal challenges that we face. 2011, I was here in the United States, and I've watched what Congolese did on the inside and outside. It was one of the moments where I wish that the world followed what was going on in the Congo. Because I believe that if the democratic process in the Congo doesn't go through, it will cause instability, not just for the Congo or the region. Because people will check out of the democratic process, and when they do, they use violent means to actually achieve that. The UN report actually in 2012 documented how while the Congolese were organizing for the elections, there were situations within the country that could have gone very volatile, where the M23 were already organizing CNDP at the time, putting weapons in different areas. But the Congolese, again, at the times, they showed, just as in 1960, that we do not believe in military actions. We are people who will go in the street and try to have a say from that angle. Given the 2011 election was not credible, which I would say bluntly, Kabila stole the election. The will of the people was not heard. Where people wanted a different leader, a different path of the Congo, but it did not occur. 3 months after that, as the international community, right, supported in a way, specifically the United States, supported the result of the election, is saying that we want stability in the Congo, right, and they sacrificed democracy. In 3 months' time, instability started. February 15, I still remember that that's the day after Valentine's Day. The U.S. ambassador Ann Twister in Congo in French, in a press conference that many people did not see, I always say he was doing that in hiding, said, let me be very clear that the United States is supporting Kabila as the next president of the Congo for the next 5 years. Right in March, after the ICC released the convicted Thomas Lubanga, and then there was a call to arrest Bosco Tanganda, the rebel leader who's now at the ICC. The instability started, which completely changed that. So the question now on the inside of the Congo is the legitimacy of the Congolese government. If the people do not see themselves in that system, no matter what happened in 2016, it will affect the whole region. People ever are organizing. We have young people across the country, in Katanga, for example, who have mobilized to educate the population about what is at stake with the change of the election in 2016. We have religious leaders within the country who have also spoken on the issue of the Constitution. It should not be changed. We have political leaders on both sides of the aisle, opposition and some in the majority, who are also voicing the concern. But all the concerns that they're sharing is we have to have a democratic process where the people of the country see themselves in it. But now, if in 2016 it does not happen, my worry is what will happen in the heart of Africa and the region, given the configuration we shared of the political dynamics in Rwanda, in Uganda, and in Burundi at the time. And I will add more as we discuss on what needs to take place for that to happen on the Congolese side and as well as on the international community.
Thank you very much. Michael.
Democratic Republic of Congo prepares for elections in 2016. I think we would do well to pay attention to the picture events of the last year have painted to help us decode what the attitude of the government of President Joseph Kabila might be. Over the last year in Congo, we have witnessed the killing of FARDC Colonel Mamadou Ndala in North Kivu, and a general suspicion greeting the official government explanation that he was killed by Uganda's ADF rebels, as well as the death of General Lucien Bahuma in South Africa, whose official explanation of natural causes I also believe that quite a few people in Congo accept. We have seen a reshuffling of the army top brass with General Gabriel Amisi, whose forces, along with those of Laurent Nkunda and other generals, committed a wave of killings, rapes, and lootings in Kisangani in May 2002, appointed as head of a defense zone that includes the capital, Kinshasa, and the provinces of Bandundu, Bakongo, and Equatorial. As Alain noted, we have seen the expulsion by the Kabila government of Scott Campbell, the director of the United Nations Joint Human Rights Office, following a report that outlined the human rights abuses of Congolese security forces during Operation Lukofi between November of last year and February of this year. We have seen Kabila's relations with his former right hand in security matters, Katanga native John Numbi, sour even further, with Numbi accused of supporting an armed rebellion against his former boss to such a degree that in a pastoral letter the Catholic Church in Katanga said there was a black hand behind violence there, which certainly to many observers I think seemed to be a reference to Numbi, and his support of the Bakata Katanga rebels. We have also seen rebellions in several cities of followers of Katanga's self-styled prophet, Paul Joseph Mokungabila. We have seen a series of apparently coordinated moves against the Union pour la Nation Congolaise, UNC party, of Vital Kamerhe, who helped, as many of you may recall, Kabila formed the PPRD, or the Presidential Party, and was president of the National Assembly before falling out with Kabila and being ousted. These have included the violent dispersal of a February 2014 UNC rally in Bukavu, which injured several dozen people, sporadic travel bans on Kamerhe himself, and the arrest of UNC Secretary General Jean-Bertrand Ewanga following an August 2014 rally in Kinshasa. Despite the defeat of the M23 rebels in the east, there is still quite significant violence in North Kivu by, among others, Uganda's ADF rebels, the Mai Mai Cheka, in South Kivu by the Raya Motomboke and Burundi's FNL, in Katanga by various Mai Mai groups, including the Mai Mai Yakutumba, Bakata Katanga, in Ituri by the FRPI of Cobra Matata. As Kabila looks around the region and ponders his next move, what does he see? In Uganda, the 28-year-old regime of Yoweri Museveni, which seems more concerned with the ability of its citizens to choose their sexual partners than choose their political representatives, has, I think, reached the point of caricature. In Rwanda, the 20-year-old rule, either de facto or direct, of Paul Kagame, which has sponsored at least half a dozen rebel movements in Congo over the years, has become, if anything, more bellicose over time, all but bragging about its ability to crush dissent at home and execute rivals abroad. In Angola, President Jose Eduardo dos Santos is finally settling in after 35 years in office and is welcomed abroad as a venerable statesman. In Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe, the situation is much the same. While in Congo-Brazzaville, save for a brief interlude in the 1990s, Denis Sassou Nguesso has been president since 1979. In Burundi, Pierre Nkurunziza certainly appears set on seeking an illegal third term in office. The cost thus far in terms of international reprobation to these political grandees of this kind of malfeasance, duplicity, and bloodletting has been very minimal. Despite having lost two of his closest advisors in recent years, both Mr. Numbi and Augustin Katumba Mwanke, I think the perceived advantages of remaining in power for Mr. Kabila and his advisors, in an atmosphere marked by a patronage system with overwhelming executive authority and a highly politicized judiciary, and a perception sometimes that the international peacekeeping mission there buttresses or supports the regime, which is sometimes fair, I think, and sometimes not fair, but I think a lot of people on the ground in Congo have that impression. I think Mr. Kabila and his advisors have judged that the staying in power, the perks of staying in power far outweigh the perceived cost that will be paid for doing so. Though, as was mentioned, Article 70 of Congo's constitution limits the president to 2 5-year terms, renewable only once. And Article 220 states that the presidential term must not be subject to a constitutional amendment. I believe that at best, a public referendum on such an amendment will happen, which, if other recent ballots in Congo are any indication, will almost certainly be marked by a high degree of fraud. It was in June 1967 that Mbulamatari Mobutu Sese Seko held a referendum that cleared his way to rule for another 30 years. And I believe it is to this and to the records of longevity of his neighboring heads of state that Kabila will draw his reference, not from the often toothless flattery and threats of the governments of the West and the international community.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a very basic question to start off with, and I think this is especially for Kambale and Michael, which is, why should we care? I mean, we're here in the United States. We have, I think, an international audience here. Kambale, you point out that we should care both for humanitarian reasons. You talked about the moral imperative, the moral authority of the United States. But you also talked about the fact that of the consequences if we don't act, the fact that this could actually drive violence beyond the borders of the DRC. So if I could ask you sort of to hone in a little bit more on that question, and also you're involved in activism in the United States. That's your bread and butter activity. How do you communicate this to Americans? We're in a world where we have, it seems that the entire world is an ebullition. I mean, we have Syria, Afghanistan, we have ISIS, we have Ebola, all these things are happening. You know, why should we care about a conflict that is so incomprehensible? I challenge anyone to remember all the different armed groups that have just been mentioned. And how do you communicate this to an audience here? So those are two questions. Why should we care, and how do you communicate that?
Take it first.
Absolutely, and maybe Michael, since you also deal with these questions, you could respond.
Yeah, I mean, my position has always been to show the connection the United States has with what's happening in the Congo. So on one aspect is what should we care about? We actually do not know how much involved we are in Congo, right? So it's to dispel the myth that this is a faraway place. So I'll start with the mining interest. Specifically speaking, that within the country, the biggest investment in Congo is Freeport-McMoRan, over $1 billion. That's a U.S. company based in Phoenix, Arizona, right? Where the president of the Congo flies directly from the Congo to Phoenix for meetings, right? So we do not know that. Then I go into our electronic devices in a very simplistic way to show. Then I start sharing examples. That's why I'm going to Ferguson, where the young people there inspire me so much in what they were doing. They are facing the militarization of the police head on and saying that, why are Congolese police looking like RoboCop? And clearly showing them that on November 15th, the US Embassy had on its website, which is still there today, you can go to see it, that they donated $500,000 worth of police equipment to the Congolese police. On November 22nd, before the elections of 2011, we have footage of Congolese protesters in the street who are being shot by the Congolese police with real bullets. Then the fact that our police is being militarized is similar to the issue of Eric Garner being killed here, the NYPD and its violence, and also what is happening there. Then people in this country start seeing the connection that it's not that far away place. And since you are in Harlem, I hope I'm not scaring anyone, what happened in Guinea happens in New York, right? That we are a global world. So they start getting it. So it's one showing that Congo is not that far away place, that why should we care about the Congo? Well, the United States has been involved in Congo since 1885. And what happens there, right? The United States was the first country to recognize the Congo as a personal property of Leopold II. The United States was the first country to recognize Kambale as the president of the Congo, which made the international community shift in 2012 to say that this is business as usual, and it created instability. So that has helped me at least in conveying that to the American audience so far.
Great. Mike, you deal with this issue of how to communicate it as well, but I'm also wondering if you have anything to say about the why we should care issue.
Well, I mean, I would say as a U.S. citizen and a U.S. taxpayer and a voter, you know, who do you think paid for those guns that the M23 and the CNDP and the Rally for Congolese Democracy used when they tore Congo apart for the last 20 years? Who do you think supports the military budget of countries like Rwanda and countries like Uganda, no matter what they do? I mean, you know, I think we should have cut off military aid to Rwanda 15 years ago. But, you know, we only had a temporary suspension of military aid, whatever, a year and a half ago, something like that, after it became so obvious, you know, that it could no longer be ignored. I think the idea that somehow, and this goes to why I think there is a looming crisis, the idea that somehow all of these leaders can get away with all of this, you know, malfeasance and bloodletting with virtually no cost, yet somehow Kabila will be convinced not to continue on as president. I think it's counterintuitive, because none of these other leaders have suffered any kind of cost for doing quite horrific things. And it's one thing that troubles me is, you know, you have these kind of avuncular figures on the international stage, like Bill Clinton and, you know, Tony Blair and George Bush and people like that. And if you see the effects that their policies had, particularly, I mean, and I keep circling back to Rwanda, obviously the situation in Congo is more complicated than just Rwanda's involvement in it, but it has been, I think, particularly destructive. You know, I think these people should really, we as Americans should be concerned that we are supporting this kind of terrorizing of defenseless civilians in a country like Congo.
Do you feel that, I mean, one of the things, so I agree with both of your depictions. It does seem there's been a shift in U.S. policy. As Kambale was pointing out, there was a brief suspension, but not just a brief suspension. You had the nomination of Russ Feingold as Special Envoy to the Great Lakes. You had, end of 2012, Obama got on the phone to Kagame, expressed his disapproval. They explicitly said that for the first time, really, Rwanda's backing this. There's no doubt about this. Stop back. Do you feel that there has been a shift in U.S. policy? Do you think that there is a new dynamic afoot in U.S. foreign policy towards the Great Lakes? Maybe you first, and then Kambale, feel free to.
I mean, I think there's been a shift in rhetoric surrounding the way that Kagame and his regime in Rwanda are talked about. In terms of actual policy, I don't think there's been a great shift in terms of our support, financial and military, for that government.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you...
Kambale?
No, I agree. So, but then the question for me, right, beyond even the shift, is what will happen in 2016. I spoke about the influence that the U.S. has, right? Is on one hand we're having everyone witness how all these African dictators were invited to dine in Washington for the U.S.-Africa summit. For me as a young African, that was really a mixed message. You know, you chastise Kabila, saying that when Kerry was there, you know, that you should not run again, and there should be no change of the constitution, right, in March, I believe. And then in July, him, Kabila, Musavuli, Kagame, all are dining at the White House, where a couple of weeks before that, Obama had young African leaders in the Young African Leadership Initiative that he has, of saying these are, you should take ownership of everything that's happening in your country. So the rhetoric is so visible. that I never, maybe I'm too pessimistic, I never trust any American politician in whatever they say on TV, whatever they do. What I believe in is the American people's consistency in challenging the government to change the policy. Because the change of policy was not US moral authority to say, we are going to do something about Rwanda. It became an embarrassment to the United States to continue to support Rwanda while many nations were doing so, and ordinary people in these countries continue to press on the US. When will you stop doing that? If it was left to the United States, it wouldn't happen. Susan Rice will still be at the United Nations Black in UN report, but New York Times exposed the connection and the conflict of interest. And then we have many and many more journalists, like Al Jazeera, people in Al Jazeera, documenting what's happening, showing US duplicity that they had to shift. So I can't count on the rhetoric. I have to encourage the American people to keep the noise to make sure that the US is on the right side of history in 2016.
Alain, we're talking about geopolitics now. I know that you work at the UN, but geopolitics is incredibly important for what the UN does. You said right now that the UN mission is having a harder and harder time carrying out its mandate in the Congo. You had Scott Campbell, the head of the Human Rights Division for MONUSCO, for the peacekeeping mission, expelled for basically just stating the facts of a military operation carried out by a police operation in Kinshasa. You've had the head of the peacekeeping mission, Martin Kobler, prevented from carrying out his mandate, and just good offices trying to bring people together, various political parties together. How does, and the UN is obviously nothing but sort of, in itself it has little leverage. The leverage is provided by the international community. So this is where I see geopolitics sort of backing or preventing you from doing your work. How do you see this going forward? And I think maybe here going towards the electoral process, do you feel that the UN has a space in which it can play a meaningful role in the electoral process, or should the emphasis not be so much on not you, but the United Nations, but rather on the United States, on France, on the UK, on international community that bankrolls, to a certain extent, these governments in the region?
Yes. That's a very important question. I see a difference, I must say, between 2011 and 2016, or 2015-16. In 2011, we had a change in the constitution from a two-round presidential vote to one-round presidential vote, and there was nobody in the international community who said much.
In fact, the U.S. ambassador in the Congo said this is the sovereign prerogative of the Congolese people to deal with.
From a legal standpoint, he was right. Because, not from political, legal, because it was an article which could be changed, unlike Article 220, if you go through the formal parliamentary procedure. But, politically speaking, and you mentioned a few months after the 2000 elections, suddenly you saw M23 coming up and a host of other armed groups' activities. So there was instability, which was afterwards quelled. But in 2016, from different aspects, the US has been very vocal. In May 2014, Mr. Kerry and especially US Special Envoy Feingold, very clear publicly, saying there should be no third mandate for President Kabila. This, for me, is a sea change.
Not only did they say don't change the constitution, but they explicitly said Kabila stand down in 2016.
Exactly, and more forcefully than other members, Western or other countries. It was quite interesting. Why? Was it on moral grounds? Maybe. Was it on strategic grounds? Maybe also. Maybe, and just drawing a parallel or comparison which may not necessarily apply, but Mr. Kabila has been in power for 15 years. He first as a result of a political compromise, and then elected twice. Once in 2006, it was considered by the international community as credible. 2011, there are a lot of criticism, elections were very flawed. And I believe there is a trend that if towards 2015-16 the same element of lack of credibility would appear, it would have a deeply destabilizing effect on DRC. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why I personally see a possible change in a position of a major ally of the DRC for stability geostrategic reasons. And perhaps, and then just perhaps, that may apply to some other countries.
So you're saying the United States may have a strategic reason to push for a change and to push for
a credible electoral process.
Credible electoral process.
Yes.
Let me ask you a provocative question, playing the devil's advocate.
Sure.
What relevance does the UN have in the Congo? Given that UN has been repeatedly, UN played, when we were together in the Congo, the UN had the constitutional mandates to be involved in the Congo. During the transition, the UN was the guarantor of the transition. There was a crisis in the transition, everybody appealed to the UN, come and help us out. You were almost a quasi-sovereign player in the UN, I mean in the Congo between 2003 and 2006. After 2006, the UN's role in the political process has become increasingly marginalized. To the extent that the UN has now moved much of its operations to the east, become more and more involved in securing the east, but even there, been increasingly criticized for being unable to protect civilians in imminent danger. So you have both the marginalization politically, where you've done in the past, there's been a great involvement, because Kabila doesn't want the UN involved in his affairs, as Kobler and his good offices example that you mentioned. But also a lot of criticism about the role the UN has played in terms of protecting civilians. So maybe, I know it's a provocative question, but perhaps you could address that.
Sure. First of all, the constitutional composition of the DRC has changed after 2006. Until 2006, the DRC was partially sovereign. And it was just after the election of 2006 that the country assumed fully its sovereignty. So the CIAT, the international accompagnement by the international community had to stop legally. So it was a normal process.
This was the group of foreign countries that was involved almost on a legal basis as a guarantor of the transition. Absolutely. That came to an end.
It goes back to 2002.
Right.
So this rule had to stop legally. Now on the other hand, as I said before, you are dealing with a government which has a very sovereignist approach. And we, as UN, need to strike the fine balance. Where on the one hand, we maintain a modicum, or we maintain our credibility, but on the other hand, being able to play a role. How could we do that? That was the question. We cannot do that on our own. We need the support of the international community. We need the support of various actors. We need the support of the special envoy for the Great Lakes region and the team of special envoys.
You're talking about the UN special envoy.
Absolutely. And which includes not just the UN special envoy. It includes also the US special envoy, the European Union special envoy, the African Union special envoy. All those together need to and of course the UN MONUSCO special envoy is part of that team. So we need to find an international coalition which is ready to convey the right messages, but also adopt the right policy towards bringing about a credible electoral process. May it work or not, that's another question. But I think that the UN cannot leave as such. I mean, even if we are perhaps marginal, I would not go so far. I think that when you speak to Congolese people, they will tell you, we were there at the birth in 1960. You have accompanied us all the time. You were there between 1960 and 1964, when there was a rebellion in Katanga. You came back in 1999. We are there since 1999. We started with 60 people. We are now around 20,000. Yeah. So we are, and 90%, 96% of our military force is in the east, because that's where the armed groups are. Right. On the other hand, we need to make sure that we live in the right conditions. And that is why we need to work together with all the actors, both domestically and internationally. But we cannot do it on our own. We need to have strong support from major actors.
Michael, I know that you in the past have been constructively critical, let's say, of the United Nations. I mean, do you want to weigh in on the UN, the role that it, or maybe, or broadly speaking, you talked about the international community a little bit, but maybe more specifically about the UN?
I think one thing that the UN mission, the peacekeeping mission in Congo, has had to overcome, which I think it has done to some degree with the intervention wing that helped defeat the M23, was the fact that I think for in the East for several years it was looked upon as a wing of the Kambale government. It was looked on as legitimizing the Kambale government, and I'm thinking of like Umoja Wetu, which was in operation in 2009, Kamiya 2, which was in 2009 as well, and Amane Leo, which was in 2010. Now in Kamiya 2, it was common knowledge that Bosco Ntaganda, who was a wanted
These were all military operations carried out by the Congolese government.
Yeah, with UN support, with MONUSCO support. You know, in Kamiya 2, it was known that Bosco Ntaganda, who was a wanted war criminal, who was known as the Terminator, and not because of his fondness for Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, but because of his modus operandi in the field, was commanding the FARDC forces at the time. And you know that this support of that particular mission was taken against the advice of the UN Office of Legal Affairs. And then finally, after X hundreds of civilians had been killed, they stopped it. I think that has been a big hurdle, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong or contribute to the perception of the peacekeeping aspect of the UN mission. But I think that's begun to turn around a bit after M23. I don't know if you guys agree with me or...
I mean, not necessarily the UN is, I don't believe the United Nations in this current configuration, mainly because of the political will that's lacking in the Security Council. The crisis that's happening there is very easily solvable if there is the political will to actually end the crisis. So staffers who are in Kinshasa, or you know, I always remember the interview that I always forget his name, the former commander of the MONUSCO forces. He's here in New York. I always forget his name. But he did an interview in 2008 speaking about FDLR and CNDP. And he said that you know, the FDLR and CNDP are political problems. You know, all the United Nations can do is put military pressure on these forces, but we have to solve the political issue. So we can ask more from the UN, but we have to look at what is the political will of the Security Council members to actually end the crisis. But then the other aspect in the discussion, I think that we are also forgetting that there are Congolese who are fighting, right, to change the dynamics. That no matter what we come up with in terms of solutions for the crisis, what the UN can do, what the international community can do, the role of the international community, I say, is to stop playing the negative role into Congolese politics. But at the end of the day, it's really going to be up to the hundreds of civil society groups who will send a petition saying this is the path we want to see for our country. The political leaders who have said we do not want the change in the constitution. This is what we want to see happen. The religious leaders, the youth groups who are doing all the civil education across the country. So what we should think about is, within the UN, within the international community, what role they're going to play to make sure that the will of the people is supported, so that they are the ones actually solving, instead of creating almost as a, you know, it's becoming almost, at least in the narrative right now that I'm hearing, as a roundtable discussion in Berlin to say what will work for the Congo.
Let Congolese speak for themselves.
Exactly.
It sounds like you're not too much in disagreement with Alain, in the sense that you're saying that you know the problem of the Congo is a political problem. The UN can do certain things, but without addressing the political problem, that's not necessarily something the UN on its own can do, but that the big powers in the Security Council, and that's exactly what Alain was saying as well, that the UN has a certain amount of influence, but it's the great powers that have to provide it with the leverage and power that it needs. Alain, I want to get into solutions to the current problem and what we should and can do, which is what Kambale was pointing to, but do you want to say anything about in response?
Since 2013, there has been a change in our mandate. Following the M23 crisis, and following the regional agreement which was signed in Addis Ababa, we had, number one, and that's a new element in peacekeeping history, a strengthened military mandate with the establishment of the 4th Intervention Brigade, which for the first time in history, if you look at the mandate terms, agrees on targeted offensive operations to neutralize armed groups jointly or unilaterally. And that was a result of the M23 taking over Goma for a few days, and it created a diplomatic shock in the region. On the other hand, a strengthened political mandate of good officers by the special representative. And I believe we have to understand that the military option can only be subsumed as part of a political problem. If we a political solution, if we are able to solve, to move ahead politically on addressing some of the key issues, key reforms, security sector reform, elections, then the role of this 4th Intervention Brigade, which has assisted decisively the Congolese armed forces to defeat M23 military. So the situation in the east, while they are dramatic, with ADF murdering 80+ civilians, unfortunately we cannot be everywhere. I mean, the territories, the geography are so difficult. We can only be in small spots, and we have established an impressive and I would say innovative array of solutions in terms of community alert networks. We have now unmanned aerial vehicles, but we can prevent, we can address, we can join with the armed forces of Congo, but we cannot substitute.
Right.
That is why we are, I believe, still very much part of the solution.
How do we do that?
So I'll start from the first level, but I have to say something.
Go ahead, but briefly, and then get to the empowerment.
Yeah. No, the reason I'm saying that is the 4th Intervention Brigade was an African solution, you know, and I think sometimes the UN presented as this is something that's new that they actually did. Well, at least my reading of it was that South Africa and I think Namibia,
Tanzania and Malawi.
Tanzania, okay, Tanzania, Malawi, and South Africa joined the Congolese government's voice of actually going after this M23. We can argue if it was economic reasons or so on, but specifically this was like almost a repeat of when SADC nations in the past came at the support of the Congolese government. But the way they actually came forward to say we are going to support it was not done under the auspices of the United Nations. So it was not a UN initiative. It was an African solution in actually dealing with these military forces, and which continue to insist that that's how we're going to have regional stability when Africans are coming up with solutions of dealing with the problem. Of course, it was military, which sometimes I have concern with, but it had tangible results that the local population saw and brought about peace and security for a moment, stopped the M23, but we still have other armed forces there. So I just want to make sure that we have that context, that this was an African solution to deal with the military, but the UN is taking credit for it. Now to the point of...
no.
That's what I'm sharing is my opinion. I don't believe it.
No, the UN was very much aware of this, and of course we worked together with our African partners.
Exactly.
But then, for many reasons, it was thought it was better to put it under a UN, with, of course, members from African peace troop contributors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now in terms of solutions, right, I believe that the first thing that needs to happen, while we know that we defeated the M23, we still need to put the emphasis on Rwanda and Uganda to effectively seize the support of militia groups in the Congo. We've seen this type of calm peace in the Congo, but there is no guarantee that they will completely cease that. The reason I'm saying that too is I've seen in the news quite a few times the discussion around the FDLR, the disarmament of the FDLR, the intent of the Rwandan government to, of course, stop the FDLR. While I know that they have been a very negative force, if we have to look at who suffer the most from the FDLR armed forces are the Congolese people. But I think the approach that Rwanda is using right now may escalate the situation and seeing another intervention. So the first level is for the foreign governments, especially Rwanda, Uganda, to effectively and definitely cease the support of militia group. The second level that I think is important is what I shared before about the legitimacy of the government. No, we have to have transparent elections where the people in the end of the process are actually seeing themselves in it. So it's not a question of who is going to replace Kabila. It's a question of, do the people of the Congo believe in a process where that is legitimate and that their voice have been heard? Because if that does not occur, that will only create a mistrust of anything the government is doing. And I saw that during the issue we had with the M23. Now, I could say that in some level that the Congolese government may have had good intent, but every Congolese was very suspicious on Congolese decision to deal with the issue. A good example, to contextualize, we speak about New York. You have the two towers falling down, right? September 11, 2001. And then George Bush speaks to the American people 8 months later to say that we have been attacked, right? So that's what happened to the Congo, where it took over 8 months for the Congolese president to speak to the Congolese people that we have a conflict, and that created more mistrust. So for us to have a legitimate process where people have their will is important. And lastly, I already pointed out to it about it's really up to the Congolese in the complex issue that we have right now for us to solve it. And we've done it before. It was thousands of young Congolese in 1958 who had all odds against them, right? Led by MNC, which was a nationalist party that included people from many political parties, and where the Congolese people voted for the political party, showing that we are nationalistic, right? They could have voted for Abako and others, but they saw their will into the political party. When all odds, shocked by the Belgian paratroopers on January 4th, 1959, they still went out in the street and continued to mobilize, and they shocked the world when the Belgians had the Van Bilsen plan, the Congolese had the Independence Chacha plan, and they achieved it. In 2 years, in 2016, I see that as a new dawn for the Congo. What will the Congolese people do? And what's important, how with international solidarity, we can come in support on what they are going to do to transform the country so that foreign intervention does not interfere with the decision-making process in the Congo.
Can I elaborate?
I was about to ask you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I assume most people here know the FDLR is a Hutu rebel movement from Rwanda based in eastern Congo. And I think the FDLR have been, you know, and the official kind of characterization of them by the government of Rwanda, it is the same genocidaires who committed the genocide in 1994. Research on the ground among the FDLR, I would say, shows that that's not really true. There are a lot of the people are, number one, too young to have committed the genocide, but there are still genocidaires in command positions in the FDLR. The FDLR is really good at terrorizing Congolese civilians. It is not a serious threat to the government of Rwanda, I don't think. I don't see, I mean, when was the last time they had an attack in Rwanda? It was
They did attack 2012, but the most serious attack was 2001.
Okay, yeah, so it was quite
13 years ago.
Yeah, quite a long time ago. And, you know, I think that the FDLR is a useful fig leaf for the government of Rwanda to keep intervening in Congo. I mean, and they use a series of proxies. They have Laurent Nkunda. Then Laurent Nkunda starts to think of himself as a historical figure. They get rid of him. They get Bosco Ntaganda. Then Bosco Ntaganda gets visions of grandeur, and they get rid of him, and they replace him with someone else. And this has gone on for many, many years. And, you know, I've read reports on Radio Okapi and other places that there is talk that the M23, or what the M23 was, are reforming now in North Kivu. And, you know, I feel like we've seen this movie before, in a way. So I think, as Kambale said, the real solution is you cannot deal with the violence, two things. You can't deal with the violence in Congo without dealing with the lack of legitimacy of regimes in the region, Museveni, Kagame, Kabila. I mean, the last Rwandan election, Kagame said he won 93% of the vote. Now that should invite ridicule from everyone, I think. And these are three leaders who have, I think, at this point, very little legitimacy. We have to deal with that. And also we have to deal with the fact that I think when local communities try and arrive at solutions within Congo itself, they are often undercut by these bigger forces, by these government forces. I think Kabila, for example, views local communities in North Kivu and South Kivu coming to arrangements by themselves as very threatening to his power. And so I think those two things, dealing with the geopolitical reality of the region, not just Congo itself, and trying to support local initiatives as opposed to maybe these big grand government initiatives, are two important points that maybe we should focus on for a solution.
Okay. Talking about solutions, Alain, you said, I invite you to say anything you want to about potential solutions, but if I could also focus your attention on what you started off with, which is that the UN is powerless without the backing of the P5, the Security Council, the world powers, that a lot of the influence that it has comes from there. What would you say that, what can the UN do, but what can also those world powers do in the electoral context to both increase your own effectiveness, but also to weigh in to allow the Congolese people, as Kambale said, to decide for themselves who their next president and elected officials will be?
No, I agree on the importance of the credibility of the electoral process for many reasons, which I believe would have then an impact also on the regional situation. Because if we are able to have credible elections, it would facilitate MONUSCO's departure. And I'm sure that with a mission which costs $1.5 billion a year, which is the largest peace operation in the world, maybe, and after 10, 15 years of presence, maybe time has come also to look into our orderly drawdown. And we will have a review of our presence.
If I could just ask you about, before, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's you mentioned before Kabila had already asked for some drawdown of MONUSCO troops. If there are, let's say, completely shambolic elections in 2000, or no elections in 2016, 2000, and it's obvious that Kabila is trying to rig the process completely, at what point does the UN say, actually, why are we involved in here at all, and just draw down? Is that an alternative, or would that penalize the Congolese population for the sins of the president?
I'm afraid that it would more penalize the population than it would the leadership. Okay. But again, of course, it would be up to the Security Council to take a decision. But I could imagine that, for example, we would withdraw any logistical support for the elections, which were important in 2006, especially where most of the operations were conducted with logistical support from the UN. But I would say, beyond the legal and historic aspects of the credibility of the electoral process, we're talking about stability, not just in DRC, but in the region. I think if DRC, and which is very particular history of 32 years of Mobutism, from which the country, I believe, has not really fully emerged until today. But if in 2016 there were to be a legitimate change of the guard, if you would have elections where the people, both from the majority and from the opposition and civil society, would come to the conclusion and perception these were credible elections, I think that would go a long way to strengthen the country, to improve its centering around strengthening and consolidating the democratic new political order in DRC, which would have, I think, also beneficial effects elsewhere.
On the region?
On the region,
right.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that we've spoken enough. Let's have the audience ask questions or perhaps comments. Again, I would ask you to be brief in your comments and questions, and also be cordial and polite. So we'll start with the gentleman here in the front. At the beginning, we'll take each question, then respond, and then we'll group questions together.
My voice is not so robust these days, so I will use the mic. I have a two-pronged, I should introduce my Frank Lefevre. I'm a retired neuroscientist. On the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Rwanda from Uganda, I stood in the rain with a group of Congolese outside of the UN, waiting to see if the mapping report would be released intact. I have a two-pronged question. I think the two prongs do go together. Michael Deibert has touched on a couple. Chris Bermutz has recently posted a sort of an inventory of the recycling and redistribution of generals in the Congolese army, some of which seem to be aimed at interrupting local corruption arrangements, but part of it, an overall strategy, seemed to be to consolidate Kabila's secure control militarily of 3 regions important in the election. And in connection with that, I'm wondering about this, with all the other armed groups there, this hell-bent for leather talk of a military solution to FDLR, with, I think, surely some collateral damage. And I'm wondering how this fits in with Kabila's military consolidation of power before the election.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, the reshuffle of army, there was recently a shuffle of army generals across the country. And as some analysts have pointed out, this has allowed Kabila to consolidate his control. What is the relationship between this and military solutions against the FDLR, if I understand the question correctly?
Yes, sir.
Alain, you want to go?
I could try, but yeah. Yes, I think this is one of the signs, but let me be clear. President Kabila has not yet announced, any decision, and as known, even among the presidential camp, there are some hesitations about him, changing the constitution. The most likely scenario is delays and on technical grounds, be it at the local level, be it because there's a need for an administrative census. But at the same time, some experts would see the fact that he has appointed some of the old-timers in strategic positions, especially potential electoral hotspots like Kinshasa, and putting their very controversial figures does not bode well. It is a signal which is not very positive. Let's put it this way. FDLR has become, the issue of FDLR has started a couple of months ago when the FDLR announced its intention of voluntary surrender. And since then, there has been involvement of ICGLR, of sub-regional organizations, SADC, Southern Cone, and the countries of the region, ICGLR, to try to come up with a convincing, and of course with MONUSCO very much involved and others, to try to convince FDLR to come out of the bush, surrender voluntarily, or face military option. And I think that it would be an important element if the voluntary surrender process could be successful, because it would be one of the reasons which would perhaps take away a pretext for some of the neighboring countries to intervene. Unfortunately, so far, we have not seen much of this. And maybe there is no direct correlation between the two, although one could argue that the DRC has recently announced publicly that it would be willing to join in joint operations against the FDLR in early January, if the FDLR surrender process would not have been completed peacefully.
Can I ask what the plans were for relocating the armed FDLR personnel after they gave up their weapons?
Well, the idea was to bring them temporarily to a transit camp in Kisangani, which is in the Oriental province, more inside the interior of DRC. But so far, we have a total maybe around...
My reading is that these temporary internment camps are tantamount to death camps.
Not at all.
No.
Well, I think maybe what he's thinking about is recently 100 demobilized soldiers and their families starved to death.
That's a Congolese army camp. That's not the FDLR.
Exactly,
camp.
that's different. Yeah.
But of course, the ideal would be to, as happened for over 11,000 FDLR combatants over the last 10 years, to be repatriated to Rwanda. I mean, as you mentioned, there are only 2,000 remnants, and with dependents, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 people total. 10% more or less have surrendered or have at least deposed the weapons. But they have refused to move to Kisangani because there has been a political decision by the FDLR leadership, those commanders, not the youngsters who were born after 94, were too young to participate, to move. And is there a correlation between both? I would say one is more perhaps electoral related, the other one has a regional dimension. And if it were solved, and unfortunately so far indications that it has not been solved, that would go a long way towards helping to calm the situation from a regional standpoint.
I guess the lady here, you want the microphone? You probably can't hear you.
No, I'll just talk.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Cool. My name is Sarah Kazadi. I'm Congolese. I'm a journalist and filmmaker based here in New York. My question is addressed to Alain, but all of you can chime in if you'd like. In 2011, the UN sent electoral observers to the Congo for the elections. It wasn't just the UN, the international community was involved, you know, the Carter Center, a lot of different groups to ensure that the election ran smoothly. Everyone came out of that saying that it was deeply flawed. Those who were keeping it very real said that Kabila stole the election. I'd like to know about whether the approach will be different in 2016 in regards to ensuring that the election is run smoothly. Are there going to be any different types of tactics to ensure that, you know, the outcome is fair? Just if you'd just like to address
If I could add to that, I think it's a very good question. One of the problems in 2011 was there was no parallel vote tally. So we don't know at the end of the day, although I fully agree that the election was stolen and it was stolen by Kabila, we don't have conclusive evidence of who exactly the winner was and how much he won, he or she, well, would have been a he, won by. Are there plans to do a parallel vote tally? Do you think that that would be a good idea, in addition to her question?
In 2011, I would like to say that the only observer mission who said that the elections were not flawed was the African Union.
And SADC also.
So all the others, including the UN, came to similar conclusions that the elections were flawed and made recommendations. One of the recommendations was the establishment of a new electoral commission headed by Abe Malu, who was the head of the electoral commission in 2006. So he brought with him a positive legacy, at least perceived as positive. Since then, there has been criticism leveled at him. However, some of the lessons to be learned from 2011 would be, one, to have observers on the ground as early as possible. Training both of national observers and in some spots international observers. Have them there well before the elections start. Certainly, and that's also something which Abe Malu also has said on several occasions, is to have a transmittal of data much quicker and in a much faster manner and in different spots. In other words, there were 169 centers for the transmission of data in 2011. Probably one of the aspects to look at would be to multiply by 5 or by 10 this size, so that the transmission of data will be much quicker and all over the country. Thirdly, security. One needs to be very clear that electoral security would be said in a manner that you would be able to protect the different sites. We still have some insecurity elements in the eastern part, especially of the Congo. We still need legislation. I mean, as currently we have different pieces of legislation in Parliament. We need a drawing of the electoral boundaries, constituencies, both for the local level and also for the national legislative level. And that's another point with the difference between 2011 and 2016. We just do not have just national elections at the legislative level, at the presidential level. We also have local, at least that's what's said, local and provincial elections. And it's still not clear how the provincial elections would take place. Would it be direct? Would it be indirect? All these elements need to be weighted in. Concerning a parallel telling, do you mean choosing by the UN?
I mean by anybody.
it would be a good idea. Would it take place? I have my doubts on that. But
because Kambale would not want it to take place.
I think that would be probably one of them.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on this question about how to do better than 2011 to guarantee free and fair elections?
I mean, again, I think we have to look at the atmosphere leading up to the vote. And in the 2011 elections, you know, both the president's supporters and the opposition made some fairly blood-curdling statements through the media. And you know, I think the atmosphere in which the elections are held is really important, because obviously you can't you know, have months and months of violence and then tell everybody go vote. I think so. I think maybe speaking out early and forcefully, if there's obvious fraud being prepared, which I think a lot of people think there is, and if there are obvious violations of Congolese law and international law and the way the elections are being held, getting ahead of that, I think, would be constructive.
Yeah, I would like to add, I think technology will play a big role in it. There are people that I know who have who tried to work on it in 2011. Then one of the issues that I still remember during the elections last year was when they stopped the SMS. But the young people did find out that they could still send information with BBM. So they were still sending photos and images. The issue that I saw in terms of those who were doing the parallel checks and balances was that we were not coordinated, right? So the Carter Center had a way of doing things. They did not work with others, so it was so proprietary. The church, which has over 30,000 people in the polls, we had about 60,000 polls in the country. They still have not shown the data that they have, because that if they are able to release at least the data that they have, that will help. So I think it will take courage. There are people who are doing things. I think with technology, we can actually create a system, but then it will have to come with young Congolese who are on the ground, who already worked on it in 2011, to find a way there. Like some example I can think about. Frontline SMS and Ushaidi can be reformatted to have people through BBM display pictures on their smartphone or some of the basic phone text pictures of just the chalkboard where they put the results. And we tried that already before, right? So those technology ideas of having an open source model for locals to expose the system can work. It worked in Senegal, it can work in Congo.
It worked in Kenya too. They did, and that's how they did a parallel vote count in Kenya through SMS, through the very similar what you just said. Alain, you wanted to add something to that?
Yes, I would like to say that atmospherics are fundamental. Right now there is, let's say, not exactly the best of relations between the electoral commission and the opposition. And if you want to have credible elections, you need to find the kind of consensus, or let's see, agreement of major parties to agree to participate. And a lot of this, I believe, is related to 2016. Local elections are very important. Is the sequencing, should this be discussed further? Perhaps, maybe it's important to have national elections on time in 2016 and maybe provincial and local. I mean, but what is important is the element of trust. And trust, so far, seems to me, or at least from what I hear or what I have seen, lacking. And if that question is not overcome or addressed, we will go towards problematic elections. And this is again related to the question of a third term. And all this, it hovers over the whole process like it's looming large as a shadow. It shows and should not, because we are not just talking about a president. We're also talking about other actors. We're talking about senators. We are there since 2007. We're talking about National Assembly parliamentarians. Some of them may not perhaps necessarily be eager to have the election 2016. So there's a lot of elements which come together. Vote count, parallel vote counts for civil society would be, yes, would be a good thing to do. But all this, I think, needs to be addressed in a climate of more inclusiveness. That's for me.
We had a question from a gentleman back there.
My name is Brunzi Nikki. I hail from the Caribbean island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I presently live in Toronto, Canada, and I'm here visiting my grandchildren. First, I'd like to commend the organizers and those who are presently here attending this forum, because I believe forum of this nature, even though it might be lip service, it is still good to actually get the word out. And if that is its purpose, I would like or feel that the school should be involved, the churches should be involved, so that there could be a wider dissemination. I know it's supposed to be question period, but the problems confronting Africa over the years, and especially Congo, has been so numerous, it is difficult to put it into the form of a question. So I'm going to make a statement. I listened to a lot of blaming, who's responsible, and to me it's like a band-aid solution, lip service, the sort of thing we've been getting for years without meaningful and proper solution to the problem. The problem in the Congolese, or in Africa for that matter, could only be decided by the people who live there. The Western world cannot define solution to the problem. As a matter of fact, the Western world is a problem in itself. If those of us who have studied history knows anything about what have actually transpired, for example, education should be a must for the people in Africa, regardless which part of it is. Health services should be a must. It shouldn't have to wait until we have a situation like Ebola to be running around like chicken who have lost their heads. Housing should also be a fundamental part. And before anybody say these things would cost money, I just made the point that Africa has been exploited, has been treated badly, have been talked about, and paid all sorts of lip service. Nobody talks about the rape. Nobody talks about the resources which was drawn out. So easily, there are countries who have benefited. And if we are really serious about solving some of the problems, we should be calling on those countries to provide some of those things that I mentioned on. And stop playing this blame game. Stop saying who is responsible. Let us all work together in a collective manner so we can decide on those things. Now a lot of talk was surrounded by the Constitution, the election. We know it's from St. Deibert to Patrice Lumumba. The Western world have always been placed in government. And then turn around when they're same government. Violate the rights of the people. And pay again lip service as to what they're doing wrong, what they should not be doing, when they are the ones responsible for it. And panel, like you folks at the head table, should be honest enough to deal with the problem not from the top, but the very foundation of it. Because that's the only way you can really bring about meaningful changes. If you're sincere, or if you want to do something. Or if it is just designed to pay more lip service, then I could understand it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you'll find a lot of sympathy from the panelists to your point of view. In fact, I'm not sure anybody up here would disagree to that, but does any of you want to speak to the particular, I think the more expansive view of the Congolese conflict, and maybe perhaps the historical view of the Congolese conflict, the fact that there is this amnesia, we feel that the Congo is so remote, but as Kambale was saying, we have been involved since the beginning, since the creation of the DRC. So I don't know if any of you have any reactions to what the gentleman said?
Yeah, I mean, when you say no one writes about the rapes and the looting of resources, I don't know what exactly you're referring to, because there's lots of information out there for anyone who wants it. Lots of reports by the United Nations, by groups like Global Witness, by groups like Kambale's. I mean, you could read my book, you could read Jason's book, but a lot of others, Gerard Prunier's. But you know, I think there's a lot of that information out there for people who want to research it. And you know, I think the role of the international community in the misery of Congo is one that we all agree on. I don't think as Jason said, I don't think anyone on this panel would disagree with that.
I do think that he points out a particular a difficulty, which is how do you promote bottom-up reform from the top, if you will. You know, we're all, you know, whether it's saying we need to put pressure on the United States or the United Nations, these are all top-down actors. At the end of the day, you know, you have to get around to the paradox of trying to allow the Congolese people to express themselves freely, but to allow them to do so from the top. In other words, we need to create the permissions conducive to that, but from the top. And that's it's a very tricky sort of thing. I mean, we could just say, okay, let the Congolese deal with this, and then leave the country to its own devices. But it doesn't strike me that any of you, I mean, all of you have highlighted the importance of international actors, and yet at the same time said that all of that needs to be done in order to empower Congolese. So it seems to be, it's a difficult circle to square, if you will. I'm not sure, Kambale, you've talked a lot about this.
I mean, if I may add, and I hope that my comment was not geared toward the international community will solve the issue. I'm very clear of that, and I think I emphasize also that at the end of the day, it's up to the Congolese. And the challenge, at least from Congolese elders who have helped us, me personally, is that whenever they organize democratically to remove Mobutu for the past 30 years, they did not foresee the outside intervention. If I even have to put it in the context, Lumumba came here in Harlem. How many people even knew who Lumumba was? He went to Washington, D.C., was at Howard University, right? He met Dave Chappelle's mother, who actually went to the Congo to help him with the work that she was doing. How many people heard him, right? So he was coming to the U.S. with the full understanding that the U.S. will undermine his government. And I still remember Dr. Sian telling me that. Dr. Sian is Dave Chappelle's mother. She said when she met Lumumba at Howard University, he was already told that he's a dead man by someone at the State Department. I do not know who that person is, and this is a primary source who met Lumumba, who shared that with me, right? So imagine if Lumumba had a Twitter account and a hashtag to bring about, right, the noise around the world that they are undermining his government. I'm seeing that right now. They kind of shared, in the beginning they said, I'm going to Ferguson. The only reason we are speaking about Ferguson is that you had young black people in Ferguson for 4 hours who saw the dead body in the street, who took it to social media, and it held people accountable, right? So that was the grassroots thing. On the ground, Congolese are now waiting for the West to speak about that, what's happening. They are organizing. Civil society group, over 600 of them have been mobilizing. The religious groups have been mobilizing around those issues. But the challenge is, with the sentiment that you have, how can you not be connected? And that's the call that I've been making, right? How can you be connected with what they're doing so that whenever they are undermining the will of the people, you are shining light in your community wherever you are? And that's been the call of the Congolese. It's a two-part approach. Kwame Nkrumah said it. He even wrote a book about it. That's how deep it is. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana wrote Challenge of the Congo, where in the 60s he already knew the importance of it. And in his book he said, Congo's challenges are both internal and external. So no matter what we do on the inside of the country, we have to be conscious of the outside intervention. By working in solidarity, we'll give the people on the ground the chance and the space to be able to determine their own affairs.
Good, thank you very much. We're going to take a bunch of questions, we're going to group them together, and then I'm going to ask the panel to speak to them because we don't have too much time.
Thank you. My name is Doris Mpumu. I'm from Congo, Brazzaville, the other Congo, who are going through the same tribulations. I'm an activist and a feminist, and thank you for organizing this. I wish actually next time that we can have this online so people even from the Congo can participate regardless of the time difference. It's a dilemma. I don't know what to say, and I really want to speak about solutions. I hear you when you say that we need local solutions. We're talking about elections, but we need to talk about the political economy of the elections. Who will benefit because Congo-Kinshasa is such a rich country, and we know, we've talked about the fact that the war is fueled by the wealth of the coltan, diamond, and all that. So we cannot just talk about finding a political solution when the roots of the problems of the Congo are economic. So we need to navigate both. And I think navigating both concurrently is the challenge that we have today. We can have another person at the head as the president of the Congo. But who this person will serve, that's, I think, the difficulty. Will that person be serving his country or another country's or continent interest? That's the problem. And because the DRC is such a rich country, it's very difficult to separate the economic interest, because everybody has an interest in that, in that country. So I think that's the difficulty. So that's one issue. The other issue that I wanted to talk about is the African Union. Many of African countries will be facing the same issue. Congo-Kinshasa, Congo-Brazzaville, Sassou Nguesso will also try to modify the constitution. So let's identify the different countries where governments or presidents are trying to modify the constitution and build a regional, a continental movement of young people who want to say no to this kind of undemocratic processes. So the African Union, I know it's a paper lion, but it's really by working through the African Union, that with civil society organization participation, that we can really begin to challenge this continental institution. We need to use it. We use the UN in order to strengthen it. We need to use the African Union in order to strengthen it as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Was it Doris?
Yes, Doris.
Yes, thank you very much. Claudia?
Thank you. My name is Claudia Vance. I work with Alain. That's why my question will probably be addressed to Kambale and Michael and of course Jason, because I have the privilege of discussing with Alain on a daily basis. It's in a similar direction as Doris's first question. I think we have talked about, or we have established that many of the problems that the Congo is facing are political, and we have talked about, you know, armed groups and the support from neighboring countries, and in terms of possible, you know, solutions. But my question would be, what needs to be done to solve the internal, national Kinshasa political problem? And of course, we talked about the elections and the alternation, and that is an important part to it, and the related risks. What about other processes? Is it enough to have credible elections? What about decentralization, for example? In 2005, during the debate on the constitution, it was my impression that this was a very, very important issue to the Congolese, all these questions related to that. So what needs to be done to solve the internal political problem in Europe?
Okay. So you're talking about other problems other than elections, so decentralization and other problems, the other processes of the Constitution called for.
How important are they?
How important are they? Thank you. And we had this gentleman here, a question.
My name is Eric. I'm a Foreign Service Officer with the State Department. I worked in Congo from 2011 to 2013. And I'm not a government hack. Do not. This is all my personal opinion. I just think, I want to say that I personally feel like people in Congo, especially Eastern Congo, have an overestimated opinion of U.S. government interest and U.S. government involvement. I think I've heard every single conspiracy theory there is about what the U.S. government or the Americans in general are doing in Congo. And I think that the situation isn't the same as in the 60s, etc. And a lot of people quote that, but I think, especially on the American side, that our focus, our world has grown, our interests have grown. And people tend to blame us for a lot of things that, ask the average American where the Congo is on the map, nobody's going to know. And I think that people think that we have a strong interest or influence in that area. And a lot of times we really don't. We've gone to U.S., the government has gone to Kambale or Kambale or Musavuli and declared this or stated that or wanted this, and they said no. They decided that, what's good for the U.S. isn't good for them. And they worked instead with the Chinese, the Europeans, etc. So it's not like during the Cold War when it was the U.S. and the communists. I mean, I think that a lot of our influence has been weakened. That's not to say that we don't have influence, we definitely do. Secondly, speaking of conspiracy theories, I was an elections observer in South Kivu in 2011. And a lot of what was reported as fraud and mishandling, etc., was actually the logistical challenges inherent in working in the Congo. For instance, when we arrived in Bukavu, people say, no, you shouldn't be in Bukavu. They know you're here. Everything is going to be perfect here. You need to go out to elsewhere. So we would go out there and it would be the same. And we did a lot of the same initiatives that you recommended, taking of pictures, etc., and the double tallies. And it all came back the same. I have, even on my iPhone, my iPad now, the figures. We stayed there from 5 a.m. to midnight watching the votes be tallied and we took pictures and we went to this, what was it, Centre de Vote, the Bureau de Vote, to verify, and everything checked out. And
how many polls?
I'm sorry?
How many polls did you?
Honestly, I don't remember.
Less than 100?
It may have been less than 100.
It was 60,000 polls.
But correct, but I was in South Kivu, so. And, I think our worry was less fraud and more the UN plane broke down with the ballots. There's no truck to take the ballots out to the place. The road that goes out to this village has been washed away, and they didn't get their ballot. And so it was things like that, but what that turned into was Kambale washed away the road, and he did it on purpose, and you guys are helping him because you want him to win. Or they would say, you guys are supporting Rwanda because you want to get rid of Kambale, or you're supporting Rwanda because you want Kambale to stay. And so it just, and that's just inherent in working in a place like the Congo. And then finally, we've spoken a lot about the role of the international community, what the international community has done, what it can do, etc. And you guys hit upon this at the end of, the ownership process. It has to be a Congolese-born initiative, or the Congo's future has to come from the Congolese, or should come from the Congolese. And I think we don't emphasize enough the role of the Congolese, either supporting civil society, because like you guys said, there are several active members and they all have really great ideas. They don't have the access to the government. The Congolese government, it will tell you one thing and do another. It will say it will do this with you and go and partner with the Belgians or whoever on something else. So I wonder, how can we push forward like security sector reform, DDR, institutional reform, because really that's the way forward. I think a lot of times what the international community does is we'll come in and put our quick solution and we'll do something today, and it really exacerbates the problem. And we really don't focus much on really holding the government, the Congolese government, accountable for the things it has promised us, for its responsibilities as a sovereign country, and also for its responsibilities to the citizens. And I don't know how we can help the Congolese remain independent and build up their own government without looking like interventionists. So
thanks,
that's
Eric.
just my point.
And it's good to see you back in the States. We're going to go through this quickly. We don't have too much time. We did start late, so I'm going to take this round and then one more round of questions afterwards if everybody can be patient. So we have three rounds, 3 series of questions. I think a very important question that Doris asked was about the political economy. We haven't really gotten into political economy, so if you guys could address the issue of political economy, so not just the elections and not just peacekeeping, but also the economic aspect of the conflict. Claudia was mentioned the other, that we focus on elections, we focus on the political, but there's other processes that were called for by the Congolese constitution, such as decentralization, institutional reform. To what extent should those take priority? And then Eric, some comments and some questions. The comment about overestimating U.S. influence in the Congo. And this last question, then we get back to something else that we've been discussing previously, which is how can we help how can we promote accountability in the government from the outside, if I understand correctly, and empower Congolese voice? That's a question so those are the questions on the table. I invite you to pick and choose from which ones and I will then moderate, but anybody jump into the fray if you want. Maybe we can start with the political economy, because I think it's a really important question we haven't dealt with. Kambale, I know that this is something that you've talked about previously. How do you deal with this issue?
Ancestors helping. So a lot of emotions, going through. But I'm in agreement with you that we need to deal with that first. But I think it's a question of political culture. And I think creating transparency into the political sphere will help in holding Congolese leaders accountable to create that space where we have leaders who have a social contract with the people. I can share what people are doing right now, because I think we're speaking just vaguely without realizing actually people on the ground are doing these things. It starts with Bourgmestre. You don't have to wait for Kabila to come in your neighborhood to ask why the street was not clean. What is the social contract that you have with him to make sure that he's doing his job? We started an initiative called Congology. Actually, I'm doing that, right? Where I'm discussing outside of Kabila, how can young Congolese do to hold the member of parliament accountable? Who is representing you? You are in Funa. He's getting paid $12,000 a month. He come and see you only during the elections. Now, if that's not happening, how can you call him? By the way, I know a member of parliament who flatly told me when he was in DC, when I was asking him, how do your constituents contact you? And he told me, why would they contact me? I said, well, they do have something. And he said that his number is not public, right? I said, where is your office? So those basic things about having that social contract with your leaders, when you actually know how much they are paid, how to contact them, then start mobilizing a youth in your neighborhood to run the campaign, right? Will come for just the change of the political culture. What I've learned from Latin America is they did this type of work with agrarian reform, because you can't talk to people if they're still hungry. So you grow the tomatoes, you grow potatoes, it is actually legal to do so in Congo. So when you have Vital Kamerhe of UNC, who's going to tell the Congolese that Congo is like Brazil, it can be the Brazil of Africa, you should ask him from 2011 to 2014, how many tomatoes has he grown? Rather than just giving rhetoric of others. So there are young Congolese who are doing this type of work, right? But we are just in a forum where we can't just throw everything that Congolese are doing. Well, we have to be conscious that it is happening. You spoke about the regional aspect of African Union and how to connect with the different countries that's facing that. It's happening. No Fédération, what's that? FDI, I always forget what the acronym is. They've already mobilized people in on the African continent who are facing the social issues. And the civil society groups are working together on that. And I know from the Congolese perspective is Congolese and Gambians right now are working together. When the Gambians are doing protests against Yaya Jammeh, we are there. When Congolese have protests around Kabila, we are calling them. And specifically because when Yaya Jammeh and Kabila came to Washington, both of the security details assaulted their country's citizens. So it is those things that say we should do this. It's happening, but then the question in the audience is, how do we tap into what is already happening?
So how do we, that also gets to part of what Eric was asking in terms of holding Congolese leaders accountable. Let me ask you about international business interests in the Congo. I mean, this has two dimensions of it. On the one hand, there is supply chain due diligence issues, companies buying minerals that originate in the eastern Congo that were taxed by armed groups. So it's more indirect responsibility and for understanding your supply chain and managing your supply chain. And that's talked about a lot. Conflict minerals often, so there's that issue. But there's an issue that's talked about much less, that's much more interesting for Kabila, which is the fact that he's earned, or his government has earned billions of dollars off questionable, or you could say fraudulent business activities in industrial mining in Katanga, where there have been state concessions given to people affiliated with Joseph Kabila that have been sold, housed in the British Virgin Islands usually, or Panama or another offshore, and then flipped and sold onto the international stock market for 10 or 20 or 30 times the value. And then we imagined that they split the difference between Kambale and his business associates. And then the Congolese state, according to Kofi Annan, has lost billions of dollars in state resources and revenues because of that. So that again gets to the question of the fact that the Congo maybe is not so remote to us, that international concerns are much more at the core of the problem. Do any of you want to address this issue of either the minerals in Katanga or conflict minerals in the eastern Congo? And because I think that also speaks to political economy and what Doris was talking about.
Well, as you allude to, I mean, these political officials who are benefiting from the looting of Congo within Congo, I mean, they house their money in banks and, I mean, eventually in Latin America and North America and Europe. They send their kids to be educated in universities in the United States and in Europe. So I think they're not completely, they're not completely removed from being, having any kind of pressure applied against them. But then, of course, they also have partners for these kind of activities in the United States and in Europe. It's not as if, I mean, I haven't seen a Congolese head of a big European bank yet. Maybe one exists, but much as with, for example, other criminal activities like laundering drug money, for example. I mean, these are not obscure back alley institutions that do this. It's Bank of America, it's HSBC, it's Wells Fargo, places like that. So I think, in a way, that's a way to perhaps get to them and to apply pressure is, to go after the kind of where they live, in a way, where they put their money, where they educate their kids, where they go on vacation, things like that. I don't know if you guys agree.
I was at the West Point graduation this year, and there was the first, the irony was there was the first Congolese graduate at West Point, you probably know him as well, who graduated this year. Was not, the Congolese government didn't send anybody to his graduation, but the Rwandan government, James Kabarebe's son, the Minister of Defense, Paul Kagame's son was there but flunked out. The Rwandan government and the head of the army, Charles Kayonga, I believe, also had. So it's three top Rwandan generals sent their children to West Point to be educated. And this is the U.S. government that's facilitating their education at the premier military academy in the world. So it's things that seem foreign to us sometimes are not that foreign.
When Mohozi, Museveni's son, was educated in the United States military as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, there's a long tradition of this. And of course, I mean, where was Paul Kagame when
the RPF started?
So yeah, he was here.
Yeah. We have lots of questions. Alain, do you want to?
Yeah, I would like to perhaps to set the priorities. It seems to me that it starts at the national level. I mean, it starts about accountability and the responsibility of national leadership at all levels.
You're talking about Congo national leadership?
Absolutely. When we talk about the economy, the political economy, I think that if there is no complicity by Congolese or else other leaders in this kind of illegal trafficking of natural resources, if there were state authorities which would do their job, if you would have accountability, in other words, a social compact and contract at all levels, provincial, local, perhaps certainly national, then you would have also perhaps international actors or economic actors which would play the rules of the game. I remember...
I'm sorry, I have to interject. I'm not so sure.
Let me continue, please. Let me continue. I think there are different actors. You would have some who are spoilers and who have no compunction whatsoever, like in Katanga, to work with criminal networks. But you also have others. For example, if you have a mining company which is exploiting a mining site, I remember a story, I spoke to one of the directors, he said, well, we have a company of the Congolese army which is sitting on the lands where we have a right for exploitation. And they also control the artisanal miners and diggers. And they ask for some amounts so that we are able to exploit the mine. What do we do? Do we pay some monies to those guys so we're able to work? Or do we pull out? Some of the mining companies pulled out because they did not see any benefit in working in this environment. It was too costly, and it also had a reputational price. Others making the necessary arrangements. But I would say it starts at the beginning. It starts at the level of the decision makers at the Congolese level, and that's afterwards. The rest can be. I think one knows the problems. There was different reports on the exploitation of mines since 2007, which was never acted upon. So one knows where the networks are, and if a political will exists, and that is why I'm always coming back to the credibility of the electoral process, because at the end of the day, it's about trust or lack of trust at all levels of Congolese society, especially between leaders at all levels and the constituents.
Doris, you have anything very, very brief to say in response?
I mean, it's a longer conversation, but I think for a region like Eastern Congo, I don't support Kabila at all, but there was no authority. I don't think the government had any authority in that region, and we know who was controlling and still controlling that region. So to say that, I do agree with you that, yes, there needs to be some sense of accountability, national accountability and responsibility, but I think we need to go further than that, and there is shared responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I can bring it to the macroeconomic level, where terms of partnerships are not always equal. When you look at the IMF, and which is, I think, linked to this political economy, the architecture is not necessarily conducive to development. This is where I actually talk about who's developing who. Is it the West that is developing Africa, or is it Africa that's developing the West? So anyway,
it's a long conversation. It's a long conversation, yeah. As you said. I want to do 10 more minutes, so please bear with me. We'll do very briefly 3 more questions. We'll try to move through this quickly so we can conclude in 2 hours. The gentleman far at the back on the left.
Hi, my name is Jack. I'm from Congo. I attend too many conferences about Congo, about my country. Sometimes I ask myself, what are you talking about? What country are you talking about? Are you talking about Congo, where you have more than 6 million people killed? You have women raped? You have a president who stole $15 billion? Most of the time, I'm confused. And every time we talk about Congo, people really care about Congo, came up to one thing. What is lacking in Congo is a political will. Always, to reform the army, you need a political will. To reform the mine sector, you need a political will. And to have a political will, you need a responsible leadership. That would have been missing in Congo for all this year. Kabila is, I don't know, but the main focus of Congolese people today is not economy like she said. It's not about, I don't know, decentralization. Congolese people do not care. The main focus of Congolese people today is how to get rid of Kabila. Because to have a free, a fair election, a credible election in Congo, you need someone who wants to have it. You need a leadership to put everything in place so this election can be successful. Kabila cannot organize a free, a fair election in Congo. Because a free, a credible election in Congo means he's going to lose.
So what should the international community do if he won't organize it himself?
That's I'm coming. I said the first focus of everybody, when we sit down to talk about Congo, we have to focus to change the leadership. What the community, you say that America can leave every Congo to deal with all this problem. Who put Kabila in power? If you are expert, because most people like to be expert of Congo. American people put him there through Kagame. It's obvious. Who put Kagame in power? Rwanda? No, America. He studied here. Who put Musavuli in power? So why we keep talking, and now we say we can leave Congo. The main problem in Congo today, Kabila has to leave. We cannot organize a free, fair election with Kabila.
But how does Kabila leave? You're not suggesting the international community.
Kambale said, Congolese people, the church, the Catholic, many Congolese people are now, we're working together. It's not easy because he has the army. He killed people in the east. He's killing, how many Congolese people die in Congo and Kinshasa? You don't know because you don't.
In the West too, in a lot of places.
Yes. So in Congo, we're working together. We are ready to give our life, as the Catholic Church people in Catholic Church said. We are ready to give our life, so to get rid of this guy. Kambale is like a tree. You have FDLR here, you have M23, like the fruit. If you cut this tree, that's it. Everything will come down.
So I'm not sure that you're contradicting anything the panelists.
No, I'm not contradicting. What I'm adding. What I'm saying is, don't tell us about like decentralization. We don't care. Don't tell us about economy. We don't care. What we care, if you have a political will, everything will follow. The dynamic will change. So we have to focus that first. We have to listen to what Congolese people want. We don't want Kabila. And with Kabila, nothing is possible. No credible election. And with what Malumalu also, you cannot have it. You know that. In 2011, you tweet that, oh, Tshisekedi is winning in Benin. Go check your commentary. I check it. But now, when people get back, when the same people who witnessed Tshisekedi winning in Benin, already in the east, the same people, when they came back here, they are not capable to say Tshisekedi won. What they're going to say, we don't know who won the election, but Kabila did it. If Kabila didn't win, someone did. So you have to have this courage to tell people the truth. Even in State Department, we don't know who won. Congolese people know. I'll tell you, Tshisekedi won the election by far. Not even close. But Tshisekedi is like Mandela in Congo. Kabila has 97% unemployment. Obama has problem here with 7%. He 97% unemployment. You think Congolese people were going to vote for this guy? And the big majority of Congolese people believe, for the good reason, this guy is a wonder. And I can prove it to you.
I mean, I don't know if anyone else on the panel. I mean, I spoke to many people around North Kivu, for example, who were very fearful of him, who thought he could be very destructive for the country, who didn't like Kabila either.
Nobody likes Kabila.
Tshisekedi, yeah.
The
But
only people like Kabila is American. Well, some American people like Susanna Rice or Johnny Carson. Nobody like Kabila in Congo.
Thank you very much, Jack. Do you have reactions?
Yes.
We'll do reactions to this, but we'll take the other questions first, and we also forgot about Claudia's question regarding decentralization, which I just remembered. Yes. We'll get to Jack's, we'll have the panel respond to that together with the other questions. Yes.
My question is sort of a kind of a follow-up to the previous comment. My name is Pauline, I'm one of the event coordinators here. I'm also a writer in research working on the book about arts in Congo. My question is, so part of it is for the panel to reflect on kind of a broader understanding about free and fair elections, as not to talk about what that might mean, but picking up on what Eric said about some of the infrastructure on the ground. And I wonder, you know, what the kind of the education and awareness and capacity levels on the ground in, you know, local villages, etc., are around like elections and who to vote for and what they, you know, and looking at kind of things about like social contract, etc. So there's that part, and then the other part is lots of talk about getting Kambale out. Who are the alternatives?
Great questions. And we had, was it one more question? Was it the gentleman here?
Yes, she just asked my exact question.
Your exact question. Then we can take this one question here.
Yeah, just a few quick things. First of all,
what's your name?
Oh, I'm sorry, Elizabeth Barrett.
Thank you.
I'm on the New York City Bar's Committee on African Affairs. And first of all, thank you all for your expertise. It's a great pleasure. Just a couple of things quickly. How transparent is the Electoral Commission? And balancing the needs of the Congolese people doing it themselves and the pressure that the international community can affect. How can you produce things such as setting up sectors, in other words, incorporating good solutions or reasonable solutions? Has the Dodd-Frank Act conflict minerals done anything at all? I mean, a minimal of what they suggested. Then the other question, which goes to how much pressure the US and all the millions that it gives can ask for changes. You know, the Chinese are so favored because they don't ask for nothing. So to be brief.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. So we have a lot of questions. I promised to get over in 10 minutes. We have 5 minutes left. We're going to go through this quickly. Kambale, if you could address the issues, the frustrations, I would say, that Jack expressed briefly. And Alain, I'm going to ask you to talk about the infrastructure of elections that was mentioned. And perhaps as well the transparency in the CENI, as you talked about consensus and trust before. And Michael, perhaps you could talk about alternatives to Kabila. You can talk about, actually you guys can talk about anything you want to talk about, but please start off with what I asked you for.
Yes. Okay. That's a question that kept on my head. For Jacques, I'm in agreement with, I guess, I should say all the points that you shared about making sure that we have a leadership and everything is going to follow. And I guess I'm too sentimental of Congo's history, but young people in the 50s did it. You know, reading the latest foreign relations document about the challenge of them organizing an election in May of 1960, I don't compare it to the same challenges now, right? There was a will of the people back then to have a government that would represent them so that the Belgians could have, there could be a transition. There was no will to have free and fair election in 2011. We saw how the constitution was changed. We know the irregularities, man, English is difficult, of what took place, right? So I think if Congolese are given a chance, they always treat Congolese as children. I believe that they can elect a leader. That goes to your question now. No, it hurts me a lot when I hear that question, right? Who will, if not Kabila, then who? We have 71 million Congolese. It's like telling the Congolese that there is not even one person within the country that have the will and the interest of the people. The challenge is that who is going to replace Kabila? The system currently, as she said, right, makes it that Congolese leaders who are elected don't represent the interest of the people. So it's the political culture that has to be changed. That when we have a leader like Patrice Lumumba, in 6 months he's not assassinated because he had the will and interest of the people, right? So that's that. If I have to throw a name, I guess I have to do it because I'm kind of biased to like him on that. I hope he considers running, Dr. Mukwege, because of the symbol, right, of who he is. I'm also worried that before Congolese chose him, the international community already embraced him, right? So I have that duality in what to support, but outside of him, there are many Congolese leaders, but the system in place does not allow that. Other countries have gone through it, where there was popular revolution of the people to allow transparency in the system. Congolese is a 54-year-old country, has to go through that system. Then we have to support them in that process, rather than trying to find, do we take HIV or Ebola, rather than do we choose a leader that represents the Congolese will.
What about decentralization? Should that be among priorities, or is that something that is far down the road? It was in the Constitution. The Congolese people, and if you talk to Congolese, many of them say, what has Kinshasa ever done for us? If you want to have more responsible government, it's going to be at the local level, and therefore we need decentralization.
This is my opinion. You put me on the spot, Jason.
That's my job.
So this is my personal opinion. I don't believe in decentralization in the current configuration of the Congo. And the reason being is Congo's state, Congo's institutions are very weak. That it may make it, my fear is always the balkanization of the Congo when we have weak institutions, and that those areas are not able to necessarily control the country specifically. And I have to have a full disclosure. I'm from North Kivu, I'm from Beni. At least in my circle, that's been one of the biggest fears. That with that, right, we risk losing the country. But there are benefits within decentralization, but Congo does not have strong institutions to be able to protect the interest of those provinces if they become independent. So that's, that's my opinion on that.
Michael.
On decentralization?
On whatever you want to talk about, but I did want you to talk about, let's see, the options to Kambale, alternatives to Kambale as well.
I mean, if you're looking kind of with people with perhaps some political skills who might come in and fill the picture if Kambale left office for whatever reason, I mean, we already mentioned a couple of them. Tshisekedi was getting quite old at this point, and I don't think has...
He's been in hospital in Belgium for 3 months now, so...
And I don't think we'll ever be president of Congo, to be honest with you. Vital Kamerhe, who has a lot of skills, but is not able to it seems to get a huge political base nationally. I'm blanking for some bizarre reason on the name of the governor of Katanga who owns the football team. Katumbi, yeah. Is somebody certainly, I think, with political ambitions. So these are 3 people who immediately come to my mind as people to watch. And of course, when we're talking about Katanga, now Katanga has been a place where the whole decentralization argument has been settled with weapons since the beginning of Congo, since the Belgians helped Chombe secede and kill Lumumba eventually. And so this is and it's kind of funny to have a decentralization argument in a country where in many regions the state is almost completely absent anyway. It's kind of putting the cart after the horse, or whatever, before the horse, yeah. So I don't know, I don't think, at least in my trips around Congo, that people are waking up every morning and saying, what are we going to do about decentralization? I think there are a lot of people that are much more kind of pressing concerns that they deal with on a daily basis. But I do think there are people, the 3 I mentioned, and there are some others, in the landscape of Congo's politics who are worth watching in terms of their political ambitions nationally.
Alain, you have the last word.
Infrastructure of elections, what is...
So the question was, I believe the question was to what degree Eric spoke about the lack of infrastructure for elections, so roads, logistics, is that the question?
Yeah, but sort of thinking about, I guess, education and kind of capacity on the ground, so in terms of how equipped and informed are kind of local people around.
Civic education around elections.
I mean, theoretically, and it's a question also on the transparency of the Electoral Commission, and I would also like to say a couple of things here touch on what other aspects. In the program of CENI, there's a lot of talk about civic education and about right now, for example, is work on updating the electoral register, electoral cartography, and etc. So the administrative census, which is mentioned, these are theoretically good. The census may be a little bit more problematic, but the other ones are good initiatives, and they seem to have produced some results. There is discussions with civil society, at least nominally, to try to disseminate electoral materials, to educate the population, and so they would be ready for the elections. How much is done in practice is another question, because it is linked also to the very poor state of roads. Much of the transport is done by air. I mean, there are a lot of logistical issues which feed into the mistrust about the intentions of the holding of credible elections. So I would say it cannot be separated. Concerning the Electoral Commission, I would say, according to the CENI law, you have a distribution which is rather reasonable. 6 out of 13, 6 are members of the presidential camp, 4 are members of opposition, 3 civil society. Now, in practice, the president of CENI, of the Electoral Commission, belongs to civil society, Abe Malou Malou. But he is more seen as being very close to the presidential camp. So there is already in CENI an imbalance. But again, one needs to look at it beyond the formal aspect and look what are they doing. CENI is to organize the elections. They are, in principle, should be an independent and neutral body, which would just make sure that there is a credible electoral process. Transparency in terms of financial aspects, I believe there is a lot to be desired. A lot needs to be done in terms of accounting. For example, one example, last year the electoral costs were estimated at $600 or $700 million. Now we hear figures of over $1 billion, and I'm not sure where these figures emanate. So there's a lot which would need to be done in terms of financial transparency. We have an administrative census where the costs are estimated at several $100 million. I mean, in a country which budget stands at $8.9 billion. So there are also elements, financial aspects, which are very important. And I think regarding transparency, trying power sharing, could be done better and should be done in consultation with the political actors. When there are these meetings between the electoral commission and the political actors, this kind of question should be or could be dealt with in the open. Concerning the very few things, I think when I hear conspiracy theories or elements of nationality, I think if one is able to make sure that the Congolese people have a feeling of ownership, I think these conspiracy theories will disappear, because people have a sense that they have their own national destiny in their hands. Wherever you have conspiracy theories, it means that people feel disempowered, and they have to look for some guilty, overarching party, including the international community, including the United Nations and others. But once people have the sense that they command their own destiny, I assure you, this kind of skepticism, let's put it this way, or also very much distrust among the people of Congo themselves, different provinces, different groups, different political parties, I think will disappear, dissipate. And I would also add to this that concerning the alternatives, quite frankly, I do not speculate. What I'm interested in is the credibility of the electoral process at all levels. If somebody has the right program, themes, what will you do to improve the roads in your neighborhood? What will you do in terms to improve financial governance at the national level? What will you do as a deputy, not just showing up once every 5 years to distribute T-shirts and say, please vote for me, or, I mean, no, I'm very daring, reduce salaries. I mean, the people, the National Assembly parliamentarians, others, have salaries of $10,000, $12,000, I don't exactly the figure, which is more than in democratic Western countries. I'm sorry, there's something, whilst people live on the $1 or $2 a day amount. So there are fundamental questions which need to be addressed between leadership and the electorate. And I think that the question of decentralization and of security sector reform and of economic recovery will be settled, because they are fundamental, they need to be addressed. They're fundamental, they are part of the development of any state institution, extension of state institutions, but first of all, you need to redevelop trust. And to develop trust, you need to have a credible electoral process. That, for me, would be the priority. And everything else will follow in line.
Yeah. Great.
If you don't have it, you will not have the other.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on. Please join me in thanking the three panelists.